One. Welcome to MindShare TV, and my name is Robert Mardlach, your host today of the MindShare Learning Report, Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Steve Joordens, renowned cognitive psychologist and professor of the University of Toronto, Scarborough. As we mark the 5th anniversary of COVID, we're reflecting on the long-term effects and the phenomena. Dr. Joordens coined the famous phrase, the great snapback. Are we truly back to normal? How have schools, workplaces, and communities evolved in a post-pandemic world? Most importantly, how do we thrive in these turbulent times? Dr. Joordens, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, I look forward to it, Robert.
Well, let's not waste any time and jump into this. Let's start with the famous concept of the great snapback 5 years ago after COVID. Do you feel society has truly snapped back to where we were before, or are we still in a transition? I reflect back to the fact that 100% of educators, whether it's K-12 or higher ed or post-secondary, embrace some form of tech-infused pedagogy because of necessity.
Yep.
Over to you. And what surprised you most about the shift?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I got it largely right and a little bit wrong with some of that. So just to be clear, the original idea was that we are such habit-driven animals, and when we're away from when we're forced into our homes and we're away from all of our daily life things. Okay, we would live that way for a while, but the claim was once we started reintegrating, once we started going back to those ball games or those hockey games or those concerts, that very quickly we would snap back to our old way of being, that these things would trigger our habits and we would go back to living life the way we always knew. And I think for many of us, in many cases, that is true. I mean, we certainly go to these events with congested crowds of people and we're not fearful. We enjoy the events like we did before. But there are pockets. So you mentioned one pocket, which is education, where the pandemic clearly changed, the way we do things in education. The other one is like the hybrid workforce. Like so many people now want to work from home after the pandemic. Not necessarily the best thing for everybody, for their social health, but certainly something we see now. So yeah, largely we're back. But there are places where there's a shadow of the pandemic for sure that still lasts 5 years after. And I think one of the things that you and I know well is, the pandemic was a first sort of chronic stress, but it wasn't the last. We came out of that, and then generative AI, especially for those of us in the education sector, generative AI kind of comes up and suddenly disrupts all of our traditional ways of teaching after the pandemic had already done that. And so I think, in the world of education, especially, it really has been right since the pandemic, a lot of work, a lot of stress, a lot of teachers trying to stay on top of things, a lot of students put in difficult situations. Do I use ChatGPT to do this or do I not? And I actually think we're in the middle of a paradigm shift, a Thomas Kuhn paradigm shift in education, where we're in the spot where there's a spot in the paradigm shift where the old ways of doing things aren't really working, and we haven't completely yet figured out the new way. And that's an uncomfortable little spot in that cycle that happens. I know we're going to get on the other side of that cycle and that education will be better for it. But right now, I think we're living through, still stress, even though the pandemic is 5 years away. I don't know, this generative AI one started something else that has us still as stressed as we were, I think.
Well said. And to complicate matters, the geopolitical situation, here we are. I've got my little promo for supporting Canada not being for sale, and you've got your hockey jersey. And thank God we won that game. But when I reflect back on the pandemic, my comment is, when people are really down, and there's been a lot of criticism about ed techs, leveraging the type of ed tech that was used, it wasn't elegant, but it was a crisis. And so we got through it, but there was predicted, and it's happened in many ways. And you have your own ed tech startup as well, not so much a startup anymore, but you've been around a good decade. there was a cliff. There was the ESSER funding, and we have many, many examples of ed techs that thrived. Paper learning, that won our startup challenge,
Mhm.
became a unicorn in 7 years,
Yep.
and not there today. Uh, Sustainability is a challenge. Thoughts
Yep.
on how we've evolved in that regard from a great snapback perspective? Because I know many
Yep.
teachers were done with tech at some point after COVID because it wasn't elegant.
Yeah, it was an interesting period because before that, those people who were deep into e-learning were really, I think, at the top of the pedagogical game. You tended to see the people that really understood education well, and they were trying to create these really rich online experiences. And I think for some of them, I'll say some of us, because I taught a number of massive open online courses at that time, it was almost an attempt to show we can do it even better using technology. And then when the pandemic hit, I think everybody came into this world suddenly where there was a bunch of pedagogical people before, and they had to learn how to just survive. And so I think the level of use of ed tech, or some of the ways it was used, was more like, we just have to be able to deliver the learning. We don't necessarily have to boost critical thinking or all of the other things that a lot of ed tech people had thought about, I think, more before that. And so we're kind of left with these people that were forced into the online
Mhm.
space. Then the pandemic ended, and many of those people would rather just get out of the online space. So we certainly have a lot of the tools have sort of floated around and are used
Right.
more, and I think that's good. But it's all about, I've got a good friend named Bob Hoffman who says a fool with a tool is still a fool. And I think
I know
that's an
him well.
important sort of phrase. Him well. That's one of his favorite kind of sayings. And so, he wants to say it's not just about the tech, it's how you're wielding it. And there's a lot of importance about how you're scaffolding the learning for students. Are you giving them the why behind why they're doing some
Right.
process, how this is going to benefit them? I think a lot of those things are really important. And I still think our online game, I still think you will find people that say online learning is substandard learning. I
Mm.
certainly wouldn't say that, but I think there's still that feeling amongst, say, a lot of parents and a lot of people that that's the watered down version of learning. And the
Right.
fact is, it can be. It's
Right.
really online learning. The quality varies so extremely, but I'm hoping that we're focusing now more on that high quality, high impact stuff,
And
as
there's
we
various
continue.
forms of online learning. Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah,
I my master's degree at Pepperdine was a blended learning program where we had some face-to-face communication and spent time building our learning community in
yep,
a collaborative team environment. That was really impactful. When I reflect back on the impact, and that was 17 years ago, 18
yep,
years ago now.
yep,
So there's different forms of online learning, but I want to pivot a little bit
sure,
to the pandemic leaving emotional and psychological scars. You're a renowned, award-winning psychology professor. I attended one of your lectures in that brand new circular lecture hall where we co-hosted the Canadian EdTech Summit this past fall. I was
yep,
shocked to see it jammed. People want to be there in person, and
yeah,
are um, you are an awesome storyteller, and that says a lot about where we're at today when it comes to either students wanting to come to class or not. Because if you're not
mhm,
engaging, if you're not adding value, it's
yep,
not going to happen. And I want to touch on your digital twin later. I don't want to forget that. But the mental
yep,
health concerns, burnout, anxiety remain high across all sectors from education to the workplace. How has the
yeah.
pandemic permanently reshaped our understanding of mental well-being today?
Yeah, I mean, things have changed. So we can talk on the instructor side about the things you've talked about, the stress, the burnout, and now if I'm keynoting in a conference, the easiest way, if I'm talking to a bunch of teachers, one of the easiest things I can do to get them sort of on side and accepting me is to acknowledge that, to acknowledge how difficult the last few years have been, how much we're asking of our teachers. We asked a lot of them before the pandemic, before AI. They were already using their own money to buy supplies for schools. They were working extra time. And now you have these extra stressors. So just acknowledging that so many people are now feeling at least anxiety, if not some depression and burnout. that they like to know that people know that and understand that. On the student level, what we're seeing is really high levels of social anxiety, which is really, I think the pandemic exacerbated. There was already this tendency, and I'm a big, we could talk about the evils of asynchronous communication, if you will, because this has become
Mm,
a new thing for me, where text messages, I think they've really made, I think the habits that text messaging supports seem to work well for students when they're like 13 to 17, and then they hit
mm,
situations where they have to do face to face, and they are so anxious because they're used to having all the time in the world to ruminate over what they say. They're used to thinking about what comes back, and when you suddenly put them in a face to face real time interaction, they don't think they're very good at it. They don't feel like they have enough time. They don't think it's going to go well, and they would rather not even do it in the first place. So they avoid even talking to one another. So as a teacher now, we've got these dynamics where we and our colleagues are tired and burned out, but we're being pushed to do more, and our students are going through various levels of anxiety and depression as well. And that's, suddenly we have to manage our classrooms that way as well. um, yeah, it's like the ask of teachers keeps going up, and are we able to climb up with it and find ways to keep doing what we're doing and do it better? And that's the other thing you've heard me talk about with AI before. We can look at all the
mm.
stress AI is bringing, and it's bringing a lot because it's ruining some of our ways of doing things, but it's also got the potential. And when you can see that opportunity to do things better, and for me, like assessment would be a big thing we could talk about there. If
Absolutely.
we could assess better, then I think everything gets better. So I have to keep telling myself, hey, there's opportunity here too. Don't forget that opportunity, because chasing that helps you deal with all the disempowering feelings of the negatives that come with this stuff.
Well said. I met with a colleague of yours at your Mississauga campus this
Mm.
past week, and where we're going to be hosting our 16th Canadian EdTech Summit this fall in partnership with Peel Board as well and University of Toronto Mississauga. I got a sense from the professor that there is a skills gap in students coming in first year because of COVID. And
Mhm.
we talk about the 7 C's, global competencies.
Yeah.
What are some of the critical skills to thrive in post-secondary today?
Yeah. I mean, one of the huge challenges we all have as educators, right, is we're trying to prepare our students for the future. The future has never been more unclear. It's unclear what skills or whatever will function well, but we still, you and I are big fans of the 21st century skills, the ones we all talk about: critical
Sure.
thinking, creative thinking. I think those things are important. Like, I sometimes joke with my students that, when we think about teaching critical thinking, you're thinking about doing well in a job and being able to function well if you're creative, if you're a good critical thinker, if you're a good communicator. But I tell them as well, critical thinking helps you pick that person you might want to spend the rest of your life with. Creative thinking helps you keep that person interested in you. Communication, well, for anyone who's been married, it's all about communication and learning how to get that right. So these
Well
skills,
said.
whatever the workforce world might be, I believe these skills will be useful in the workforce, but I know they'll be useful for life, no matter what. And so I think those skills that we embrace so much, and have been for over a decade, I think are still as relevant as ever. And we need to find ways of giving students those skills. Now that's where, again, when you start to think of AI, the problem
Right.
potentially with AI is, imagine a writing assignment where, in order to write well, you have to structure your argument. You got to think logically and rationally. So you're using critical thought, creative thought. But if you can get ChatGPT to do it, the real loss is that practice, right? It's like this, and be just as good on the rink. And if you can do that, then people will start skipping the practice. And
Right.
that's what we're finding students doing, is they're missing out. Like, the writing assignment isn't about what you produce. It's about the process you go through to
It's
get there. That's
it's
where
the
the learning happens. And
it's
so
in
we
the
got to keep
journey.
those processes there. Yeah.
Well said. And AI can dumb people down. It's like, using Google Maps.
Yep.
When I was a kid playing hockey all over the city, there was
Yep.
no Google Maps. I
Yep.
learned my way around the city like the back of my hand.
Yep.
Now you put a student today who's never used the map and only Google, and tell them to get to from Mississauga to UTM without
Yep.
Google Maps. That's a
Yep.
challenge,
Yeah,
right?
it absolutely is a challenge. A lot of these things, and that's what technology does. We always talk about the calculator. The other analogy that I love for AI for people to think about is the photograph. And this comes from a postdoc of mine, Adam, that I work with. And he pointed out that when previous to the photograph being sort of common and easy, people would do a lot of portrait artistry. There were all sorts of portrait artists. And if you wanted
Right.
your family depicted, you would bring in one of these. It would take a long time and it would be a process, but eventually you'd have this portrait of your family. And then at some point, somebody invented the photograph. And now this photographer could come to your house in much less time, produce a much more realistic image, and suddenly, these people's jobs were gone. And a lot of people going through AI can feel this right now. But the point of that example is artistry didn't go away, painting didn't go away. It became more kind of interesting. That's where abstract art started, and other
Right.
things that photography can't do. So artists found different ways of expressing, and some might say better ways than just doing portraits. And so this is sort of where we're at in education. Our favorite ways of doing things. You can do this with ChatGPT easier, quicker, and just snap a picture and lose the whole process that went into it. So we now as educators have to think, okay, what can we be asking our students to do that is still going to engage the skill practice? Because skills require practice. They require you to engage those skills. And so I think there are some clever approaches coming and clever ways of doing that. But that's where we're in. We're right in that reinventing our whole paradigm. We're in the middle of that paradigm shift. And it's both frustrating, tiring, and really exciting at the same time.
Thank you for that. Fascinating times. With AI evolving at an unprecedented pace, what strategies should educators, school leaders, and policymakers adopt to future proof learning? How can we ensure equity, engagement, and innovation remain at the forefront of where we're going
Yeah,
or not?
and this is where I love backward design in a way, or people thinking about backward design in education. What is the last thing that kind of happens in an institution? Well, that's the assessment of learning that kind of comes in there. And I firmly believe, we can look at what AI is tearing apart. But every now and then I think about things like we use multiple choice tests widely for very important things, standardized testing, all sorts of things. Multiple choice tests are a horrible method of assessing learning. And we should look at that and say, we should
Hmm.
almost be embarrassed. Why have we been doing this? We've been doing this for logistic reasons. It scales really well. You can use it in any sort of situation. It gives a nice objective number back. But is it actually assessing the learning that we care about? And is there a better way? And so for me, I like to give this little vision of the future that I have and that we're working towards in my lab, which is a viva voce type of. So a viva voce is an oral exam, and we use them with
Hmm.
PhDs now. PhDs have to answer questions about their learning, and that tells us, no, they really learned it. What if you went through a learning episode and then you're stuck with an AI, a conversational AI that is now going to interrogate you in real time, in
Hmm.
conversation, ask you about what you learned, try to get at the breadth, try to get at the depth, maybe try to get at skills, asking you to test your creative thinking abilities at certain points or your critical thinking abilities. If we could create that assessment bot well so that it provided a true holistic assessment, it captured everything we care about as educators. Now, just having that is going to drive innovation, because then we're going to have teachers teaching to the test. If the test is what it should be, then teaching to the test is what it should be. They're going to try to
Right.
work on critical thinking because that's going to be tested. They're going to try to work on creative thinking. And the problem we have now is a really horrible test. And AI may allow us to change that. So that's the sort of hopeful thought I have of the
Right.
future. That's going to take us 2 or 3 years to get to, because we want that test to be fair, inclusive. We want to make sure there's no bias in the testing that's going on. We want to make sure it's accurate. So there's going to take some research. And that's one of the things I find challenging about this AI world, because
Hmm.
AI moves so fast. It's hard to do the research in time, what you're researching today will not be the AI of a year from now. And so it's really tricky to kind of make that all work. Fun too, but tricky.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. It's a great segue to my next question around the inspiration for your digital twin. I came and attended your class, 2,000 students, only 500 could come in face to face in the class, and you came up with a digital twin leveraging AI to meet the
Yep.
needs of office hours. Talk to me about the inspiration and where you're at today with that.
Yeah. So that came from myself, and I want to mention this postdoc again, Adam Frost, because he's so critical to everything I do now. We were creating a platform called Talk Lab, which we have created to try to allow students to learn about how to have communication, conversations basically, but then to allow them to practice with AI bots. And the idea was they're anxious to talk to another human being, but they're not anxious to talk to a bot. A bot doesn't judge them in any way. And so
Right.
if almost again, we can go back to hockey. It's one thing for someone to say, hey, here's how to do this particular thing. Here's how to do this
Yeah.
particular three-way pass. Right then you have the knowledge. I like to say, so maybe this is my tagline for this episode, because it's
Right.
a good one. Skills equals knowledge plus practice. So when we think of skill, knowledge is not enough. You could have someone come into your workforce and say, here's how to give feedback to other people in an effective way. And now everyone has the
Mhm.
knowledge. If they never actually put that into practice, and if they don't practice that regularly, it will never become a skill that they have. Practice is what turns knowledge into skills. And so if you can practice with AI, if I can teach you how to listen better in a conversation and why, what's the value, and then say, okay, now try it with this AI, that practice is what can turn that knowledge into a skill. So we were doing that for Talk Lab, and somewhere along the way, Adam said, "Why don't we just create a virtual you, and see if students like it, and it'll allow them to ask psychology questions 24/7." Anytime they want. We know, by the way, they like 2 in the morning, 1:32 in the morning. We can see the bump. That's where. So no prof is going to answer questions. So that already
Right.
tells you, like, okay, this AI is doing something that others can't. But I wonder, do we dare try something live? We haven't tried it, and I'm not sure it'll work on this platform. I'm not sure what'll happen if I try to talk to virtual Steve live, whether you'll hear his responses or not. But we
So
can
it's in
try.
your voice. It's in your voice.
It's in my voice. So basically, what he's done is he's sort of scraped my personality. So certainly my voice, but also because there's so much of me speaking online, there's a sense of how I describe things and how I talk, etc. So it's kind of got some of that mannerisms. And then it's got a general prompt, of course, to say, you're in office hours, you're here to answer student questions. So you would see, by the way, if I tried to ask it about my wife, it won't go there. Just like you wouldn't in office hours, it'll say nicely,
Right.
well, that's not what we're here for. So it knows its boundaries. But the really cool thing about it, you can ask it course information and it's really good. It's actually better than me. And it's better than me because I have weaknesses. Like for me, biological psychology was never, genes and alleles and all that kind of stuff. That was
Right.
never my forte. And when a student starts asking me about that, I'd go, oh, I'm going to have to use Google to help me answer this because I don't know. Of course, it has Google, right? It has the whole internet. So it
Right.
knows that topic well, and it gives more accurate answers than I do. And I think another important thing to add is some people say, oh, Chat GPT or whatever you're using, it'll say things that are wrong. It'll say things that are wrong to the extent that there's not a good source of information online that corresponds to what you're asking. So if you're asking about some research project that doesn't exist, it might say it exists or whatever. With intro psych, the information is so strong online. There's so many intro psych textbooks that use the same terminology to talk about the same things. It draws on all that, and it's really, really accurate. I want to mention one other cool thing, though, and this is the cool thing
Sure.
that's got our research kind of really spinning. When we had students interact with it, we found they did some things we didn't expect. They would say things like, I have exams coming up and I'm stressed. I'm completely stressed out. Is there anything I could be doing to kind
Wow.
of reduce my stress? And of course,
Hmm.
it knows all that stuff too. And so it was giving
Wow.
them really good advice about things they could do. We had other students say, I thought I'd have more friends now at university and I don't really have friends. Is there any, and it would suggest the clubs. It would say, hey, you could go to the, athletics department or look at this other thing on
Right.
the website website. You can find groups and clubs you could join. That's a great way to meet new friends. Here's some volunteer opportunities. And we're like, holy crow, it's not just doing course support. Students who have this anonymous opportunity to ask it anything will ask it these things, and it's giving them really good answers. And we're actually working to make it even more accurate, especially on the health and wellness, to make sure it actually connects them with the health and wellness center when it does stuff.
Right.
But generally, it would just take me back. It's funny too. Every now and then it's funny, and it just sort of sets
You
me
know,
back, makes me go, "Oh my
well,
goodness."
you know what? That's a really good point. My wife's a city clerk, and she leverages humor a lot in tense
Yep.
situations.
Yep.
Talk to me about the importance of having a sense of humor. I'm just listening to Dale Carnegie's audiobook, right?
I
How to Win Friends and Influence
still as
People.
relevant today as what,
It,
1931?
to our audience, if you have not read that book, pick it up and read it.
Yep.
Why do people say, and it really reinforced my personality. Why am I known to walk in and light up a room?
Yep.
Because I'm engaging, I'm smiling. It's the
Yep.
little things, the little details,
Yep.
right?
Yep. And one of
Over
the
to
things
you.
I love that he said in that book early on, it's got a bunch of chapters with a bunch of different tips and strategies as you go. But he says really early on, just reading this book, if you sit and read this book and that's all you do, it'll do nothing for you. Better to read a chapter or two and actually put into
Act on
practice
it.
those things that I talk about. And it's the practice again that activates the knowledge, turns it into a skill. So I absolutely love that. With respect to humor, so the really interesting thing about the bots we created is because we were trying to do conversations and we wanted them to be very human. So first of all, it's all in a human voice. It's not texting. I've got a thing against texting. So the idea
Right.
is to get students speaking and interacting in real time verbally. But because we wanted that to be natural, we built in an emotion sensing system. So our
Hmm.
bots can sense the emotion that you are outputting, and they react to that. And that makes them much more human. So that can go to humor. I mean, if you start getting a little jokey with them, they will get a little jokey back. And I think that
Hmm.
it's the humor, but it's also the fact that it's reacting to you. And so people find our agents really compelling, and students really enjoy interacting with them. They have a certain humanness that you just don't find in your typical agents that you see out there. And I think we just got lucky, and Adam is amazing at producing these things. But that's a big part of making people want to have that discussion. They want to feel that emotional connection, and humor is so powerful for that, right? As soon as you laugh with somebody, you've increased your trust bond. Any shared emotion you have with somebody increases a trust bond, but humor is a really good way to do it. If you can make someone laugh and they look in your eyes and you're feeling that happy feeling and they're feeling that happy feeling, you've just increased trust.
Absolutely, and it's cathartic too, isn't it? It's a stress reliever, and managing your anxiety in these turbulent times. So, with that,
Yep.
advice for thriving in an AI uh, powered world, post COVID world. Let's
Yep.
end with a forward thinking perspective. What
Yeah.
advice do you have for students, educators, and professionals navigating this AI powered post pandemic world?
Yep.
Given the geopolitical situation that we have, how can we
Yep.
embrace change, foster resilience, and turn disruption into an opportunity?
Yeah, and so here I'm going to connect with our friend Pete Bombachi and his Genwell initiative, which is all about the power of social connection. And that's 100% right. Social connection is the best insulator variable we know against stress, and it allows you to share your stress. So if I'm annoyed about something and you're a good friend of mine, and I reach out and say, Robert, geez, this stuff I saw on TV is driving me crazy, and you're resonating with that. Yeah, I hear you, Steve. And we're sharing that emotion again. When we share that emotion, we have that connection, and we're actually sharing my stress. It's like I get to offload some of my stress on you. Not that it sits on you, but it sits less on me. And otherwise, if I don't have these connections, then I'm holding this all and it's sitting on me, and it causes chronic stress, which causes the burnout. So my advice is, make friends. Make friends, but also appreciate the friends you have. Take some time to reach out to those old friends you haven't talked to for a while, and try to like have some shared emotional experiences. If you can connect with them, if you can play a sport together, and that's fun, or go what, and it doesn't even have to be happy, by the way. You could go watch
Yeah.
a horror movie with somebody, and being scared together in a horror movie brings you closer together. But those trust bonds, finding ways, and for parents with kids, I would say the same thing. Can you think of activities that you will all enjoy together, that you'll all laugh together? Like, can you imagine a family going out to karaoke and people spending time singing and laughing at each other?
Love
If you're
karaoke.
singing and laughing and
Right.
sharing that positive emotion, you are making your family bond closer. And those bonds will help every member of that family deal with stress. And so
Right.
if there's one thing, to kind of think about, and with teachers, that might be connecting with other teachers who are going through what they're going through, but taking the time to have that personal connection, get a little beyond the professional. And if you can get to that personal connection, share some emotion, that presence of those people in the workplace that you trust, and that you like, will make the stress more easy to manage, will bring that resilience.
Well said, Dr. Joordens. This has been an inspiring conversation as we reflect on the great snapback and the role EdTech is shaping the future in AI. Your insights offer a roadmap for educators, students, and industry leaders. Any final thoughts on the next famous quote from you? The great snapback is a tough one to follow, but anything come to
Uh,
mind? Hopefully,
Well,
this
I mean, what
conversation
one of
learned
the
something.
quotes I throw around to educators. I don't know if this has quite the same legs or not. We'll see.
Right,
But when dealing with the challenge of I like to say, how do I want to say this right? The bridge of wonder takes you from fear to opportunity. How I actually imagine that. So a lot of us feel fear. How can we get
right.
away from that fear? Wonder. If you start to play with these texts and you start to see what they can do, then you start to see the opportunity. And when you see the opportunity, that takes you away from the fear and puts you into a much more empowered spot. So yeah, wonder is the bridge between fear and opportunity when it comes to AI. And in a lot of teaching situations, like I've talked a little bit to people at TCDSB, for example, I
Hmm.
recommend they have wonder days where they bring teachers together and they do things like, you've got somebody coming over for dinner who doesn't like to eat these 4 foods, and you want to cook something. What could you cook? Could you get AI to help you with that? And then they play with it and they go, wow, this is kind of cool. It can do whatever. If we can get them to that kind of cool, then that's
Right.
that's the bridge. That's the wonder. That's bringing them from fear to opportunity.
With that, Dr. Jordan's grateful for your time this afternoon.
Yeah, always grateful to chat with you, Robert. It's always a pleasure.
To our MindShare TV audience, we had a number of people on live. How has technology transformed your learning and work experience since COVID? Join the conversation using hashtag MindShare EdTech. Don't forget to subscribe to the MindShare Learning Report, Canada's Learning Technology e-magazine. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.